Welcome to another episode of Bengals Brews. I am one of the co-hosts, Dale Altman, joined by my good buddy, the Orange Arrow, Derek Davis. Today's guest is our good buddy from one half of the Locked On Bengals, Mr. Jake Liscow. Jake, how we doing this morning?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Doing good. I want to say this morning because your time, it's like what, 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock, just out of bed.
Well, that's why I told Derek, I said it looked like he was binge watching last night. Like, hopefully he wakes up here this morning.
I watched a few episodes of Atlanta, which is, it's better than TV deserves.
I'm gonna sound like an idiot here, but what is Atlanta exactly?
So Donald Glover does a show about he's managing his friend who's an up and coming rapper in Atlanta. And satire and that sort of medium of societal criticism ensues, and it's pretty funny too.
Yeah, Donald Glover is a national treasure in general. Musician. He was on what was that? Community.
Yes.
Yeah, with Joel McHale and all those guys. I guess people didn't want our hot takes here on TV, so maybe we should.
You never know, man.
I was going to say, I was getting ready to go into the whole ghost show. We started watching that the other night, and that's a pretty fun one as well.
What is that one?
Have you guys seen that one? It's kind of a comedy. Like, this lady almost dies and starts seeing the ghost around the house that she's living in, but it's more comedic than it is scary and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a big comedy, more or less. Yeah, it's a lot of fun actually, but enough about TV comedies and all that stuff. Let's get a little bit into some Bengals news. I saw where I guess the boys over at Hear That Podcast Growling got to do some interviews with Katie this past weekend, or not this weekend, but this past week, and I was kind of curious to see what your thoughts were on. Basically, we'll go through the whole rundown of everything that she talked about because she was very informative. I think with her conversations.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it on Locked On Bengals as well. Katie Blackburn down at the owners' meetings in Florida, whatever random Floridian city they were occurring.
And there's always dishes in the background. That's kind of the funniest part to me. Clank, clank, clank.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess they maybe had lunch with her or something. Yeah, she met with media for about 40 minutes down there. And I think Jay was down there from The Athletic and Kelsey Conway,
I think so,
from The Inquirer was down there as well.
Mm-hmm. Hobson.
Yeah, where do you want to go?
I think we should start with what most people are probably the biggest news out of it, which would be the indoor facility that they're actively looking for. I mean, that's by far the most they've said about actually trying to get one.
Yeah, I think that indicates that something is going to be announced probably this year. My estimable co-host, James Rapine, thinks that we might see this as the first leg into negotiations for a new stadium. We'll see if the county gets involved with funding the indoor facility or not. But for now, it seems to me that Katie Blackburn wouldn't say something about this unless it was relatively imminent. I would assume they'll have something concrete this year. She also mentioned that there are a few other things that they're working on that they're not ready to announce. So the fact that she was willing to talk about it indicates that it's something serious that I think we should expect to see soon. I think that the other interesting thing about it is the acknowledgement that it would help them, which I don't think
they've really ever said
from the organization in the past. So there's a bit of an admitting of something that fans have talked about for a long time, but hasn't been as relevant for this team until they started playing into the harsh winter months. And now in preparation for the Super Bowl, they, of course, as Pat McAfee and others like to point out, had to go up to UC in the middle of a blizzard to practice before they flew out to LA. And I mean, when you're a professional football team playing in the Super Bowl, fair point. That's a little ridiculous. If you can't And I know they have like a 30-yard stretch of indoor facility in Paul Brown Stadium, but that's not really enough to do anything.
Yeah, that's not going to prepare you for the Super Bowl.
Right.
You can walk through on that surface from what I recall. I think I saw it when I was in Paul Brown Stadium a couple of years ago for quote unquote blogger day in the pre-COVID pandemic days when they brought us in for a day during training camp a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think it's a good step for the franchise, and I think I talked about it on Locked On Bengals, Thursday show last week. A couple of years ago, when I think it was still Joe and I doing Locked On Bengals, I talked about a list of things that I wanted to see the Bengals organization do to modernize. And this is kind of around the drafting of Joe Burrow and becoming a more serious franchise in the NFL that pushes for Super Bowls and things like that. And the indoor facility is on the list. And the things that remain on the list are, what are we going to do about the scouting department? And that's really the big one, because they've started spending in free agency. They haven't changed their contract structure. Would still like to see that. And they might have to do it when Joe Burrow's making more money and taking up more of the cap. But it's a step toward modernization. And we've seen a few of these now with the Ring of Honor and more active spending in free agency, a little bit more commitment to winning now than waiting for the draft class to eventually hit, and showing a willingness to spend in free agency where they've missed on some draft picks in the previous years that led to those holes being created, specifically on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. Speaking of, sorry, Derek. Speaking of contracts, since you kind of mentioned contracts and structures, I know you were a person who we kind of mentioned that said, there's got to be some incentives or something on Collins's contract here. It's a little more than the 3 years, $21 million. We're missing something. And Andre Parada come out with those details this week. I don't know. I'm sure you guys probably talked about that as well. Looks like a lot of it's tied into basically just playing time and Pro Bowl, correct?
Yeah, there were more playtime incentives than originally reported, which is why when I originally was tweeting about it and saying that like this can't possibly be right, or there's a chance this isn't right anyway. I don't know if I said it can't possibly be right, but I was surprised, and it was being reported as a $30 million deal, and none of that makes any sense with the way that it looked originally. And those numbers are reliable. So there was a data entry error from the source. I'm not going to go too much into that, but essentially some of the escalators in his contract weren't included in the first version of his contract that was entered. And so what we learned was that there are salary escalators and bonus escalators based on playtime in the first 2 years of the deal, but there's still I would say, fairly good chance it ends up being a $21 million deal. The escalators are tied to relatively high playtime incentives.
I believe it was 90%, which is a very high number.
Right. If he misses a game or two, that could be it, right? I mean, 2 games for sure, right? You think about 2 games, well, 10%, 1 out of 10, 2 games, 2 out of 17 is more than 1 out of 10. So really quick, if he has to miss 2 games for whatever reason, those incentives don't kick in. Now, if you're a Bengals fan, you hope that he makes $30 million, because that means that he's playing in 90+% of his games
at a Pro Bowl level.
Yeah.
He's made 3 Pro Bowls.
Yeah.
That's the only way it gets to $30 million. So that's what we're rooting for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Pro Bowl right tackle, you have to be, what is it, top 4 in the game, I think.
Man, Pro Bowl is kind of weird because it's a lot of name recognition and how high you were drafted and different things.
Right. Now, real quick, I don't know that this has any relevance for us, but I did see where Rappaport was tweeting that the Patriots got an in-division trade for Devontae Parker from the Dolphins real quick for a 2022 fifth-round pick, or they give up
a 5th rounder.
Okay, so Dolphins give up Devontae and a 5th rounder for their 2023 3rd-round pick. What's your thoughts on that?
Dolphins fans have been trying to argue that Devontae Parker is better than any wide receiver on the Cincinnati Bengals for 3 years on Twitter, and that's always been weird to me. He's a fine player. I think the Patriots needed a wide receiver. I think they'll still probably draft one. I don't know. Bill Belichick has his own methodologies for drafting, but where does he fit in Miami when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki and an RPO offense and Mike McDaniel, who's going to use those tight ends that he signed and is bringing a lot of those San Francisco elements, probably a lot more 12 personnel with 2 tight ends on the field, and or 2 running backs on the field. I don't know how much. I mean, they did bring in a fullback, if I recall correctly, and they love Kyle Juszczyk out in San Francisco. So, probably just where does he fit on the field? Do we really need to invest these resources in a third wide receiver when instead we could recoup a future 3rd-round pick for relatively low cost, dump some salary? Because the Dolphins have committed a ton of resources, a ton of money to new players this offseason.
Yeah, and I think didn't they paid Devontae Parker reasonably well for a wide receiver a couple years ago, I think, was it?
Yeah,
I can't remember exactly.
We can get these details over here on my left monitor and find Devontae Parker on Over the Cap. He signed a 3-year extension with the Dolphins in 2019, and he earned a total of $30 million in new money on that deal. So the Patriots will be acquiring $5.5 million salaries. The Dolphins will incur a $5.5 million dead cap hit because that's the signing bonus that is prorated. So, they take a small dead cap hit, and I'm not sure they're fine for cap space. This shouldn't have a huge impact on them. And this is a team that's going to be willing to restructure too. So if they need to, they can take some of, Emmanuel Ogbah is the primary restructure candidate. But I would say this is a pretty good indication that the Dolphins are probably pretty done in free agency. They just did a big extension for Xavier Howard as well. And so
that was last
space
night.
Is starting to get pretty tight.
So we can finally stop hearing about Xavier Howard being traded to the Bengals also. It's not happening.
Yeah, I suppose we could.
Because that's a yearly, I swear every year we're talking about him being traded. We could probably also say Stephon Gilmore, not happening. That's not happening. Doesn't even look like Larry O is in the discussion based on how Zach Taylor talked about him. I don't necessarily completely see that one ruled out, but what's your thoughts on that? I mean, it did sound like, former Bengal,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how Taylor has to talk about him right now. He's not a current member of the Cincinnati Bengals football team. I think that Ogunjobi is possible, but I wouldn't necessarily call it likely. It happens if his market doesn't materialize and they still have the money, cap space really available for that deal. You look at the cap space numbers that get reported and they lie to you because, teams don't necessarily use top 51 accounting rules in the offseason. The Bengals, I don't think do. I think they account to 53 contracts on the roster, which is already lowering the number a little bit. And they're factoring in the space for rookies, which we hate to hear, but is true. They're not factoring in the $7 million that gets reported that they tell media and then media reports. They're factoring in what they actually need in the cap to pay for these guys, which is like $2 million against the cap. And then they have salaries for practice squad guys that they're factoring in because those are expenses that you can't get around. That's at least $3 million in salaries over the course of the year, and that counts against the salary cap. So they're making sure that they have money for that. They're making sure they have money to sign guys if they need to, if guys get injured, and they're making sure that they have money for the cap hits that are coming in some of the offseason workouts. And so when you factor all those things in, you're seeing reported numbers for the Bengals salary cap hit in cap space at $18.7 million. It's probably more like $10 million realistically, and all teams have this. So unless there are planned restructures on those teams, every team is setting aside money for things like the practice squad and that sort of stuff. But some teams do it a little bit differently where they'll say, we need to sign a guy because our defensive tackle got hurt. We need to sign a guy to a veteran minimum deal. And that's going to be a $700,000 cap hit this year because it's week 7 or something. You need $700,000 in cap space. You restructure, $2 million of somebody's deal over into a signing bonus and prorates into the next year. Boom, you have $1 million more in cap space. So some teams just do that, where they have a little bit of flexibility built into other contracts. The Bengals don't like to do that. I don't think they've ever restructured a contract, at least that I remember. And so the cap space concern for Larry Ogunjobi is real, I think, because there's room for a few more signings, and the smaller the signings are, the more room there is, because it pushes other contracts off of the eventual 53-man roster. So that doesn't end up eventually counting as a cap hit. But how much money is Larry Ogunjobi going to want? Even if it's $7 million, which he played on last year, roughly $6.5–7 million, that starts to get pretty tight to the cap. And we know the Bengals like to roll over money as well. And there's a fair hypothesis, I think, that at this point they're starting to try to save a little bit of cash for Joe Burrow's extension, which they're probably hoping to get done next year, because you've heard me talk about it if you listen to Locked On Bengals. I would expect them to have spent another 25 million in cash by the time the season comes around. At least that's on the low end. They're typically spending cash at least up to the unadjusted cap, which would be $208 million, and currently they're at about $175 million. So where's that money going? Could be Jesse Bates, could be next year to a guy like Joe Burrow, could be some other extensions that are less likely, perhaps Jonah Williams, Jermaine Pratt, Von Bell. But there's still money to be spent. It's just, I'm going to be curious to see where it goes, or if it goes. Maybe they are just saving it for Joe Burrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which to me, I mean, I know you have to do it, but at the same point in time, when you've got this small window of Burrow's rookie contract, I don't want to waste that, and I would like to see him be more proactive. I mean, even if it is the Jesse Bates extension, get that done first is what I would like to see, but that's just my opinion. Larry O also, like, just to circle back to that real quick, I think if they sign him, it would probably be after the draft. They'll see if they can probably replace, part of what they got from him in the draft for a cheaper rate than having to try to pay, $5 to $7 million, whatever he would command, even coming off the injury.
I also wonder, are you buying high on Larry Ogunjobi? I know he had the breakout year for your club, and so you're very optimistic about what he could do again with your club. And I like Larry Ogunjobi as a player. I think that he does something that nobody else on the Bengals roster does. I think that he is more disruptive in the backfield than any other player on their defensive interior. He also doesn't finish those plays a lot of the time. And sometimes that leads to other players getting tackles for loss or stuffs or tackles for minimal gain in the run game, or, quarterbacks get flushed out of the pocket. Sometimes that leads to sacks for other players, but a lot of times that didn't lead to anything. And so the disruption that he generated didn't result in actually a positive effect. And so there's some of that where you want to create havoc if you're a defensive lineman, for sure, and that's a good thing. You also would like to see him finish a few more of those plays, and that's
he had a high missed tackle rate. I'm pretty sure as far as our D lineman.
Even missed tackle, sometimes it's just running by a play, and sometimes that happens with that play style. But they do need a guy who can get upfield in a hurry, can beat, can cross a guard's face in the run game on prevent the reach block from reaching him, kind of thing. And so he might be the best guy out there to do it, but I really wonder at what price and if it fits into their financial plans.
Yeah, that's why I could see, they definitely want to wait. Let's go ahead and switch gears into the draft.
I did have one question real quick. Jake, with what would your thoughts be on the Larry O thing, where last year he played it? I'm reading here on Football Outsiders, 790 total snaps, and BJ Hill with 573. Do you think if they do sign him and they flip those, do you think there's a chance that might be a hindrance as far as the locker room goes?
I don't really have a good feel for that. I mean, we haven't really I don't think that I could tell you who the leaders are on the defensive line room. I would assume it's Sam Hubbard. I don't know if Larry Ogunjobi really got much into a leadership role. I truly don't know. I know that he was very well liked in Cincinnati, but I don't think that I really like Von Bell, clear leader on the team. I think Mike Hilton stepped up and became a leader on the team.
Right.
DJ Reader, maybe. He kind of strikes me as a little bit more of a quiet guy, despite how good he is, just in having talked to him in LA. So I don't really know. I think Sam Hubbard is probably the most outspoken leadership type of that group. So I don't know if there's really a locker room disruption there. I will say that as the season went on, those splits got closer to 50-50. And then, of course, Ogunjobi got hurt. and BJ Hill played a ton in the playoffs, and they were pleased with what he did. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that it might be a little bit awkward, I guess, for BJ Hill to have signed this $10 million deal and Larry Ogunjobi to have to come back on a 1-year deal because, guys look at their sack production and those kinds of numbers, and Ogunjobi was good in that area, but so was BJ Hill. And I mean, clearly Ogunjobi thought he was going to cash in. He had a great deal from the Bears, and it's unfortunate that fell through. I hope the guy gets paid no matter where he ends up. I hope, what's best for the player. I'm always on the side of the player, but it is a bit of a weird space when you're thinking about team building and thinking about it from the team's perspective. Doesn't make sense. And that's where it gets murky and you don't know how the numbers work out from a financial perspective.
Yeah, for sure. All right, are we good to switch gears there to
yeah. I don't want to hold y'all up. We got 2 draft nerds on the show. I'm just
hey, come on now
right now,
but the positions of need. I think obviously corner right now, tight end, probably defensive tackle, but I've seen a lot of people say edge. What are your thoughts? I think we got a pretty good edge depth, but I know you can never have too many pass rushers.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys saw it. I went through the Bengals roster and put some tier kind of ideas on every position, on every player on the roster. And so, I look at that, and the thing that stands out to me immediately is that they have very few players on the roster at corner. You got Chidobe Awuzie, who's great. You got Mike Hilton, who's great. You got Eli Apple, who, if he needs to start, fine. You could do worse.
1 year.
and on a 1-year deal. And then you've got John Brannon and Jalen Davis as backups. Did you guys know that John Brannon was on the Cincinnati Bengals before this week?
No.
No.
Isn't that the announcer guy or?
Yeah.
No, he was I think they signed him off of somebody's practice squad. I don't even remember which practice squad. Or maybe he was cut. I mean, he's listed as a street free agent that they signed. So, point is, corner depth is lacking, and I think that everybody would agree that bringing somebody in to challenge Eli Apple, maybe not everybody, actually. You know what? I've taken some flack for calling Eli Apple an average starter.
Dude, you don't want to get on the Goodberry level. You don't.
No, I'm good with my anonymity, relatively speaking, with Bengals players. Competition would be healthy.
Yes,
for that outside corner spot. It's generally a healthy thing. Eli Apple won his job by competing when Trey Waynes got hurt. He kept his job by continuing to compete throughout the season. Yeah. Good for him. Trey Flowers probably feeling out his market a little bit. Big fall from grace for him. I mean, he was starting before he played for the Bengals in a very specific role. He could still be back. But even if he is back, you want Trey Flowers being your outside corner if one of these guys gets hurt?
I got absolutely blown up when we signed him, because I said I liked the signing just because of what I thought he could do in this offense, because he's always been that kind of big guy and more of a safety role, which I know he played safety, but I really like the fit on our squad with him, but.
Let him cover tight ends like he did.
Yeah.
If you got to match up with a stud tight end, like he's your good 4/5 corner / let him play kind of in the slot against the receiving tight end. Yeah.
And I would say that Lou Anarumo has liked to do this. He tried to do it with LaShawn Sims, and it didn't work as well with LaShawn Sims. I think that Trey Flowers is a little bit better. I do think that he's, again, I think maybe a little bit overrated in the eyes of fans. I think that most players generally are a little overrated in the eyes of fans sometimes, because I also took some flack for calling Chris Evans an average starter, which I, again, thought was pretty generous for a guy.
Podcast over. Chris Evans slander, no.
How is that slander?
No,
he was a third-string running back, guys. Like this is why I don't get the flack. Like I'm saying, I think he could be an average starting running back. That's pretty good for a guy who could hardly get on the field last year. Ted Karras has been a career backup. I think he's probably an average starter with the potential to be a good starter. Again, just realistic expectations. But this started with draft needs, and when I look at where they're the shallowest, I think it's I think it's corner. They don't have any backup corners that I think are actually good backup corners. Maybe Jalen Davis could be okay, but he's small and kind of a slot only guy for the most part. He did play outside, I think, at times in the preseason and maybe in spot duty in the regular season, but he's largely a slot guy just because of size limitations. So corner is where I'm starting, because if Eli Apple becomes your backup, or if they draft a guy that's competing with Eli Apple and starts the year as a backup, suddenly you have a lot better corner depth. And I still think they might sign a guy there. I think that defensive interior or 3-tech does make sense. I'm not sure it really lines up in terms of the first round specifically in this draft. I just don't see, there aren't very many first round guys to me at 3-tech in this draft. Safety, I think, is a sneaky need. I don't think is. I think it's starting to be discussed a little bit because Dane Brugler corrected Paul Dehner Jr. when Paul Dehner Jr. tried to pick Kyler Gordon in their The Athletic mock draft, beat writer mock draft, and I think Kyler Gordon at 31 is probably a little bit early for me. But if they trade back, you could see it. Instead, a guy like Lewis Sine, maybe that works. I think that a safety is a sneaky one there, especially if he's a guy that can also play some slot. Like I know Matt Minnick is currently riding the Dax Hill train from Michigan, who can play a little bit of slot, can play in the box, can play in 3 safety sets. And we know Lou Anarumo likes those as well. On the offensive side of the ball, tight end, I think we'll see a tight end addressed at some point in this draft if they can make it work. They've been very visibly, I think, talking to a lot of tight ends in the pre-draft process at pro days at the combine, etc. And interior offensive line, I think you could still see him take somebody there. They shouldn't be closed off to it anyway. Hopefully they're not closed off to it. They might feel like they've drafted a bunch of guys lately. And that's true. Jackson Carman, Deontay Smith, Trey Hill, Hakeem Adeniji, all guys that can play on the interior offensive line that were drafted in the last 2 drafts. That said, if you're sitting there at 31 and Tyler Linderbaum or Kenyon Green or Zion Johnson are available, I don't think they should be overlooked just because you feel like you've invested in the offensive line.
Yeah, that's definitely my top 3. Like, Green and Johnson, I think, come in, start at left guard to keep Karras at center. If you get Linderbaum, I think he starts at center. I think Derek disagrees with me on Linderbaum. He's a little not so crazy about him.
So, and this is what's been my whole thought on the whole Linderbaum thing. The Bengals, in my eyes, have preached for years and years position versatility. So I have a hard time believing in the whole Linderbaum to the Bengals thing. What's your thoughts on that, Jake?
Well, sometimes players are just really good at a position. Like Alex Kappa is playing right guard. And if he needed to, he could play left guard, but I don't think he's going to move. La'el Collins is going to play right tackle. If Jonah Williams gets hurt, La'el Collins is going to stay at right tackle. If La'el Collins gets hurt, Jonah Williams is going to stay at left tackle. So position versatility is great when it comes to backups, I think. But when you have a guy that has the kind of special athleticism that shows up on tape and special tape in the first place, overcoming physical downsides in terms of weight and length and all this stuff. I mean, the guy is a wrestler who started playing football recently and is just amazing at it. I think that there's some room to overlook it, especially like how many players are truly position versatile and good at it, right? Think about it. So one of them is Joe Tooney, who kicked out to left tackle against the Bengals when the Chiefs lost 2 left tackles between their first drive of the game and in the pregame in the regular season, and Tooney had to play left tackle. He played really well at left tackle. Ted Karras has played interior offensive line spots pretty well. Andrew Whitworth, a Hall of Fame player, can play left tackle and can play the guards even late into his career.
Who's the guy from Green Bay? That's probably the most versatile.
Yeah, Elton Jenkins.
Lindsey or Elton Jenkins.
Jenkins, because once again, I can go back to my Drew Sample opinion of how bad of a pick that was, because there was Elton Jenkins and A.J. Brown.
A lot of really good players could have been picked instead of Drew Sample, but we're not supposed to harp on that anymore. We're not supposed to.
I can't help it. I can't help it, Jake. I'm sorry.
You're preaching to the choir a little bit, but as far as positional versatility, I don't think it should be a knock on Linderbaum. If he's really good, and I think he's really good, then he's a player, because we don't really talk about this with tight ends or corners very often. Dax Hill maybe is an exception who can play a little bit of both. Some safety corner hybrids with linebackers. We talk about, can they do multiple jobs playing their position?
D line probably on the defense more than anything.
Sure.
Can they slide into 3-tech on a pass rushing
But
down?
a lot of teams don't do that either. They just have 3-techs, and maybe they have a guy that'll move around a little bit.
Yeah.
But
right.
I think that positional versatility is great. I don't think that it should necessarily be held against a guy if he plays one position, if he plays that position really well. It's just kind of like the draft good players mentality.
What do they say at the TDN? Don't let good players keep you from drafting great players, or whatever that whole thing is.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I don't think I'm necessarily interested in like a first round linebacker. I was like sort of on the brink of that. If Devin Lloyd,
Nakobe Dean,
31, Nakobe Dean probably is going to be available near 31. It seems like,
but I don't see it. We played two linebackers.
They play two linebackers. They like both linebackers, and linebacker depth in this draft is also great. I could see them drafting a linebacker at some point.
For sure.
But to your point, where this conversation started, I think a 3-tech. I think that if there's an edge guy they like Boy Mafe, if he's there at 31, that wouldn't shock me if they pulled the trigger there, just because I think they like Khalid Kareem. I think they think Joseph Osai is going to be good. I think they like Cameron Sample, think he's going to take a step. Maybe they even like Wyatt Hubert to be a contributor at that level. But if you can get a guy who can really add some juice to your pass rush, which is what they were trying to do with Joseph Osai last year, can't have too much of that. Just like you can't have too many corners. So like corner, you could see an edge rusher if a guy falls. You could see an offensive lineman certainly in the first round. I don't know if there's a first round tight end that I'm ready to pull the trigger on. And of course,
McBride is probably the closest thing.
Jelani Woods has a ton of hype around him right now.
Yeah. I mean, he does. I just don't know that the production and everything he's done. He's really 1 year of production.
And he's a great athlete. And I wouldn't be mad if they picked him at some point, but I might be mad if they picked him in the first round. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think I would. That would be a little early, especially after Drew's sample pick in the second round. I'm not taking no chances with what they think on tight ends.
Now, what would your thoughts be on like if it just happens that Ajabo slides and gets it to 31? Would you be interested in taking a guy like that?
I think that one's really complicated, and I think Joe Goodberry tweeted about it. He responded to some Reddit thread, and people were mad at him for saying no. And I can see where Joe's coming from, because if your opinion is that Ojabo needs time on the field to develop, which is Joe's opinion, is that he needs to play to refine his tools and get better as a football player, because he's a toolsy guy who needs to learn how to play football a little bit. Well, if you're going to miss your rookie season, that might not be something you want to draft in the first round.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially if you're this close to a Super Bowl team.
Well, At least you hope. I mean, they might be a better team than last year, and this has been pointed out by many, and I'll just reiterate it. They might be a better team than last year and finish with a worse record.
Yeah.
They might be a better team than last year and miss the playoffs. If they get unlucky, if they get unlucky is a primary way you see it happening. Because if they're a better team than they were last year, they don't miss the playoffs unless you're unlucky. From an injury perspective, from an in-game perspective, from whatever perspective. But unluck is very common in the NFL. It's almost like the expectation is that you're unlucky, actually. And if you're lucky, then you go to the Super Bowl, which is kind of what happened for both Super Bowl teams last year to some degree.
Yeah. Right. Well, and the Rams, try to buy their Super Bowl, so a little different.
Well, even still, they were remarkably healthy. The Bengals, some people like to point out the injuries. They didn't miss significant time anyway from key contributors.
Yeah, Riley Reef, that hurt. I think Riley Reef's presence, alone at right tackle, because you already didn't have a right guard. I think that really hurt, especially it showed up in the Super Bowl. Worst time for it to show up.
That's like one player, where the Chiefs 2 years ago made it to the Super Bowl with 0 starters on their offensive line for example. So sometimes you have to overcome those things. Sometimes you can't. And the thing with the Rams and the way they built their team is the Chargers too, actually. If those guys, if they lose like 4 starters for long periods of time to injuries, I start to worry about the quality of their team. And you can say that for a lot of teams. The Bengals are probably one of those teams. You know, as I did this exercise of who are the starter level players, the Bengals only have one starter level that I would consider backup, and that's Chris Evans. I think that if Chris Evans had to play, I think he could be fine.
We're back on the Chris Evans train.
That's where I always was. But at the rest of their positions, like Mike Thomas has to step in for T. Higgins. That's a massive fall off.
Yeah.
Even worse for Jamar Chase. On the offensive line, you know, the only place where it's kind of a wash to me right now is Jackson Carmen, Deontay Smith, just because we don't really know what those guys are going to be yet. Maybe one is significantly better than the other. But Ted Karras to Trey Hill, or Alex Kappa to Hakeem Adeniji, or, you know, I guess linebacker might be okay too. Marcus Bailey, Akeem Davis Gaither, Clay Johnson, Joe Bachie, all these guys played pretty well for them.
Yeah.
So maybe linebacker, the scheme is friendly enough for those guys that you don't have a massive fall off there. But Chidobe Awuzie to John Brannon.
Who? Who?
Von Bell to Trayvon Henderson, Jesse Bates to Michael Thomas, the 31-year-old safety.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of teams have this problem. The Bengals aren't exempted from it. So when you can find good depth, it's great. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Since corner, we're kind of agreeing is one of our top needs, especially we got guys like John Brannon that could have to step in and play. I'm going to fire off some names, if you don't mind. Just give me your quick thoughts on the players at corner that potentially could be there in the draft. Andrew Booth.
I think he looks like he moves really well. I've only really watched a little bit of him. I think he's a good player. I would like to see him do more that, like, he plays bail a lot and he plays off a lot. And the point that Mike made when he was watching Mike Santagan of Bengals fans is the Clemson defense is more exotic in its fronts and kind of a little bit more basic in its secondary. So I really like Andrew Booth. Wish he could have tested so we could have had some confirmation on the athleticism. Looks like a really smooth athlete though. Yeah. And doesn't look lost, really. Was really good coming downhill on screens against Georgia. I mean, made 3-4 stops like at or near the line of scrimmage, getting through blocks at times, just triggering really quickly on screens. So there's signs there that he's a really intelligent player. I just don't know that I've seen enough. I think he's a first-round player, though. I'd be happy with him at that.
Yeah. Trent McDuffie, which this is one I really like Trent McDuffie, but I don't think he'll be there. But
yeah, it seems like he's probably a mid-first round pick is where he's being projected at this point. I haven't watched Trent McDuffie. He's said to be technically great. I wonder if he hit some thresholds for the Bengals from a size speed perspective.
5'11".
He did run a 4.41, and the Bengals aren't super strict on their thresholds. But do you have his arm length measurement in front of you?
No, I do not have arm length measurement, but he's 5'11", 195, violent, explosive, gets beat by bigger wide receivers due to his average size and length.
Yeah, so the issue with the Bengals in length is if the corner has like under 30.5-inch arms, they probably aren't drafting him. And I think he was 29 and something. 29.
Yeah, I think him and Kyler Gordon, his Washington teammate, were two guys that their arms measured.
29 and 3/4-inch arms.
So maybe that's close enough. And if it doesn't show up, I haven't watched him. So if it doesn't show up and he uses the length that he has, well, that's great. I'm about 5'11 and a half. And my arms are 31 inches long. And I know that doesn't make me a corner, but
I was going to say sign him up.
Look at him over here flexing.
Yeah. Well, I'm not flexing. I'm just like extending my arm.
John Brandon, you're off the roster. Jake Liscow is on.
No, thank you.
Exactly.
I can't take the beating of an NFL, like a single NFL practice will hospitalize me.
One.
Let me ask you this, Jake. Do you think you could lock down Ocho?
No. No.
I know that whole thing Well, it was like a 2-day thing, and I was just cracking up both of those podcasts.
James believes that Terrell Owens could still be a top, I don't know, 30 NFL wide receiver. Probably the same for Chad.
What about Drew Sample? You getting a stop on Drew Sample?
He's big, man. He's got 100 pounds on me.
He would just toss you out of the way.
Yeah, I'd be on the ground. And probably he could probably juke me out of my shoes too, because he's an NFL athlete.
That's true.
Guys.
Yes, come on. You got the long arms, Jake. Give yourself some credit.
All I was using that for is as a measuring point, like an
built bars.
Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is an average white dude who does a football podcast has 31-inch arms. So when you got shorter arms than that, you're a little bit short in the arms. And again, if it doesn't show up, who cares? Like this is a concern that we talk about with Jonah Williams. Lyle Collins has short arms for a tackle. Penei Sewell has short arms for a tackle. Rashawn Slater has short arms for a tackle. All those guys are great. Who cares?
Yeah, I agree. This is very divisive.
I did notice. Sorry, I was going to just real quick, circling back to Jonah real quick. I did notice that sometimes it does show up a little bit on his tape. But yeah, back
long arms into them or something.
Do what now?
Guys getting long arms into the chest, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Sure. I think Jonah gets beat more when he. I don't see him getting long armed and like bullied very often. To be honest, I see him like oversetting sometimes, getting beat on counter moves sometimes, but I'm sure it happens. We go turn on some tape and find it. It happens to everybody from time to time, I think, especially with guys that really like using the long arm. And I would love to see. Do we see this matchup this year? I think. Do we see Carl Lawson this year? Do the Bengals play the Jets? Am I?
I'm pretty sure that we play the Jets.
They do. They do.
So Carl Lawson, Jonah Williams. I'm excited to watch that because Lawson likes that long
arm. Another corner here. I only got a couple more. This guy's very divisive that I've seen so far. Kyer Elam from Florida.
Yeah, I'm happy with him at 31. I think he's a great athlete, and you worry. I guess the primary concern with him is that he might be a penalty magnet in the NFL.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's see how it goes. I think he has great tools. I think that he does a lot in that defense and could easily project to be a very good NFL corner. And maybe you can coach some of the grabbiness out of him, and maybe he gets a little bit more comfortable. Yeah.
He's just now 20 years old. I don't know if everyone realizes that. That's got to be one of the younger players in the draft.
Is he really 21?
20.1 is what I've got written down, unless that's wrong.
I think I have. So I started our 2022 draft sheet, and I've got ages in here where they were available. So I have his age at the time of draft being 21 on the dot. So he turns 21 by the time the draft comes around.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've got his birthday in here too. May 5th. So yeah, he'll be 21 right after the draft.
Okay. Actually. Yeah, I had him even younger than that somehow, but yeah, that could have been scouting report from earlier in the year.
Well, he's currently 20.
Yeah.
But born May 5th, 2001. So.
But 4.39 40, 6'2", I don't know, sign me up for those traits, but yeah, you don't want somebody that's just constantly getting holding penalties downfield.
Yeah, and I think he moves well for his size. I just, he hits the thresholds. The Bengals haven't drafted a corner, at least early, with arms shorter than 30 and 3/4-inch arms. So that's where you look at Trent McDuffie and Roger McCreary and
Gordon and
Kyler
McCreary,
Gordon,
I think.
really wonder.
Yeah. And then my guy Marcus Jones, I don't know if anybody has his arm length, but he's only 5'8", so I'm guessing it's not real big. But he's an electric returner from Houston. I like him more as a returner probably than as a corner because he's probably backing up Mike Hilton.
You can see it for returning for sure. I mean, I think the Bengals have clearly stated an interest in a returner. I think Chris Evans is actually a really good kick returner. So I'm more interested in a punt returner. I think both returns are going the way of the dodo. I think that the NFL is trying to phase out returns. So I wonder how important it really is, but I think they're interested in return guys. So
yeah, I mean, it was Simmons, wasn't it, that even specifically said they need to be more electric at punt return.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think that the issue that the Bengals have is they try to get a guy that's going to contribute somewhere else.
Yeah.
As a returner.
Right.
So the reason Trent Taylor wasn't on, he was a practice, literally every game he played, he was a practice squad call up, is because he was a 2-point player, which was important. It was great, but it was
worked out.
It was great. He wasn't on the field besides that, except for punt returns. So
I was going to say, I don't think he had 2 catches last year in total. Or
I couldn't tell you his other catch besides that one in Kansas City.
Yeah,
it was really tough. It's generally really tough to roster a guy if all he can do is return punts.
Yeah,
it's just when you're constricted on roster space in the first place, which every team, I guarantee you, feels like if we could have a couple more guys, we'd feel a lot more comfortable, which is why they push for practice squad expansion and this sort of thing, and the call-ups and stuff. It's just hard to keep a guy where all he can do is return. And this is a point that I've made a lot. It happens from time to time, especially if they're really, really good at it. But Chris Evans can play multiple special teams units. He can contribute on offense, and he can return kicks. Easy roster spot, right? If you can do multiple things on special teams and be a viable backup, that makes it a lot easier for you. Brandon Wilson is good on multiple special teams units. So if he's going to make this roster, it's because he's also playing coverage units really well. Because I don't know that they really need him to return kicks right now.
Another reason I'd like to see Trey Flowers come back also. You know, he looked pretty good as a gunner on special teams. It wasn't his big role on defense, like match him up with tight ends if you need to.
He could do other things.
Yeah, let him play special teams. Like
when you're so you talked about versatility earlier. Where you need versatility is if you're a backup. If you're a starting level player and you're really good at your starting level job, less important that you can be versatile, right? Because you can do the thing that you're really good at and it can win you football games. If you're a backup player, having versatility becomes much more valuable because it keeps you on the roster and gets you on the field.
Right. And going back to Trey Flowers a little bit, you know, when you look at it, I mean, that's a guy that you kind of need, especially with you look at who we're facing this year. You got Atlanta, Kyle Pitts, you've got Baltimore, the Browns, the Steelers. You know, you've got those guys twice a year that you'll play. Buffalo and what is it, Dalton Schultz there?
Did they sign Dalton Schultz?
He's on the Cowboys, Schultz
he's on the Cowboys.
Schultz on the Cowboys. Dawson Knox, is that who you're thinking of for Buffalo?
Yeah.
Didn't they sign a tight end though? I thought they did.
Buffalo,
they signed OJ Howard.
OJ Howard.
Yeah. Right.
I think that it'll be interesting to see how they play Kyle Pitts, right? I mean, they should just put a corner on him the entire game, in my opinion. Just treat him as a wide receiver. That's what he is. And I think at times, I mean, Auden Tate currently WR1 in Atlanta. So
so you really could
put whoever you want. Put a linebacker on Auden Tate if you have to, and put Chidobe Awuzie on Kyle Pitts. If that's what their depth chart looks like in Atlanta by the time they play.
But this is kind of more or less looking like a murderer's row of tight ends. You got, you know, Miami with Gesicki, Gronk possibly in Tampa.
I think it's going to be easier than this year was.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well,
I guess they still play Kelsey, but they avoid Kittle and they avoid Hawkinson. I guess they don't play Fant. They played George Fant last year too. Mark Andrews still on the schedule twice, so that's always going to be tough. Cleveland has like 7 tight ends, so maybe one of them will be good. You never know. I do think it'll be a little bit easier than last year, though. Like last year, they played, I think, 6 of the 8 top receiving tight ends in the NFL. They avoided Gesicki. Was like one of the guys they avoided all year, and they do get him this year. So there.
But you know, Dawson Knox was a guy. I think he finished like tight end 2 or tight end 3 in fantasy anyway. And as far as tight end goes, and you know, you're just replacing one with another, in my opinion.
I'd much rather play Dawson Knox than George Kittle. Or I'd rather go against Dawson.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's an easy one.
Yeah. Right.
George Kittle's a beast. D tackles in the draft. Anybody you like that you think that's a position first round or more second, third round?
I've honestly had a really hard time finding where the value lines up for the Bengals on the interior defensive line, just because a lot of these guys have question marks if they are pass rushers or they're nose tackles. Devontae Wyatt's 24. Travis Jones is probably nose tackle.
Yep.
Logan Hall,
DN / like,
you know, I wanted to look at him as like, okay, maybe this is the Geno Atkins mold of this class. Not saying he's going to be Geno Atkins, but maybe this is a Geno Atkins type player. But he's 6'6".
Yeah,
right. And
does not play with that same leverage as Geno.
He doesn't. He plays high quite a bit. He wins with this weird high spin move where he like tries to knock the guy from above him out of his way.
Yeah.
And then you get to Perry and Winfrey and Fedarian Mathis and Matthew Butler, and there's just questions for all those guys. I wouldn't hate some of those guys. Like if one of those Winfrey, Mathis, Butler guys is a pick in the third round, fine. If Logan Hall somehow is there in the second round, fine. But I don't think any of them are. And so that's where it's just kind of a bit of a gap in value in my mind. Travis Jones at 31 probably could be a good player.
But is he a nose tackle?
Excite me a ton at 31, where you're trying to get the guy that's going to hopefully make the biggest difference for you in this draft class.
I honestly think the two biggest positions are probably corner and trade down, if we're counting trade down as a position.
I could see edge for sure. There are a few other spots, like offensive line you could still see. Safety, I think you could see. And so those are the ones that I think you could certainly see at 31. So that the names being Booth, Elam, Lewis, Sign, or Sine. I think it's Sign.
Sign, I think, too.
Jalen Petre, I'm interested. I don't know. We'll see. But Zion Johnson,
the Zion, Kenyon, and Linderbaum, like those three. I mean, I think, man, you solidify your line so much if you take any of those three guys. And Zion Johnson is one who, when we talked about versatility, he's played at least 4 spots at a pretty decent level in the SEC. So,
right. Well, I guess we can kind of finish up there. I know we don't want to keep you too much longer here, Jake. One thing I did want to say real quick since we're talking about draft, before we get off here, this bad boy right here, I got here for a giveaway for us. If anybody's interested in that, once we get to 200 followers, I'm going to be giving this badass draft hat away. And so I did want to plug that real quick. Jake, do you got anything you want to plug?
Check out the Locked On Bengals podcast. That's all I got. That's the bread and butter.
2 guys that could play in the NFL if they chose to. Jake Liscow and James Rapine.
I would never make that claim because it's batshit insane.
I made it for you.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us, Jake. We really do appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Enjoy your weekend.
Hey, you too.
All right. See you guys.
Uday.
See it.
All right, Derek. Anything else you want to?
That was awesome. I really appreciate Jake for coming on with us. I did want to also let everybody know I'd have this as well.
Well, it's like I was like, we can let him off there for you to plug stuff.
Yeah. This shirt right here is a women's large that we're giving away. We'll probably finish that up on Friday. If you're wanting to know anything about that, just hit us up. I think we'll.
And then you were saying the hat was for subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah, this is for YouTube subscribers. So once we get to 200 followers on YouTube, I'll be giving this bad boy away. Here.
Which, hey, that's not far, man. And we get a couple shout outs, a couple retweets. I mean, we're already close to, I think, 170. So we get 30 more subscribers than
I wanted to get
a brand new draft hat. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to give away before the draft, so hopefully we can get it there. And then really the last thing I wanted to plug was our t-shirts and stuff like that we're doing. If anybody's wanting any merch here, I'll go ahead and show that and get click on that right there.
I love my Bengals and Brews shirts. I ordered one too. I was like, I gotta have one. Probably gonna order a hoodie next, honestly. and stickers, stuff like that.
Yeah, you can get T-shirts, tri-blend, V-neck, basically whatever fit you like, you can get, and hoodies, stickers, kid T-shirts, mugs. You can get a mask if you want one of those.
We don't have dildos or anything like that for sale yet.
Yeah, none of that weird shit. But hey,
yeah,
if anybody's so inclined, we might see what we can do. But no, not really. But
life size. Your wife will leave disappointed, just like mine.
Exactly. But yeah, that's really all we got. I'll have to send Jake a shirt just for being gracious and coming on the show with us. I really appreciate that. That was fun. But other than that, there's one thing I wanted to talk about that I hate that we didn't get to, but we kind of just glossed over the whole stadium deal and everything that's going on right now with the indoor facility and all that. But I just want to,
man, I don't know. I feel like all that stuff's like next level for me. Right. I'm kind of like, whatever. I don't want to speak on it too much.
My whole thought is, if I think that if they are with the indoor facility, I really think that this is going to be one of those where they have locker rooms over there. They have offices over there. They have all that stuff. And then another thing you got to start thinking about too, which when I was listening to hear that podcast growling, it got me thinking about it. I think eventually you got to start thinking about the new stadium and stuff like that too. And if you're doing all that, you got to figure out.
One thing with that is it looked like they could kind of kick that can down the road some. I was reading an article, Paul Daner on The Athletic, I think it was yesterday, maybe 2 days ago, and he was saying, yeah, it says 2026, but they basically have these rolling type agreements in there that it can go all the way to like 2036. So, but, I mean, they still got time to,
Right, and you're not really worried about that, but that's something you still have to factor in though, because of, okay, if we put the practice facility here and the stadium's right here, well, when we build the new stadium, we can't just take this stadium and tear it down and then build a new one right over top of it, because you'll be without a stadium for a few years. So, maybe they're thinking, okay, if we put the practice facility here, the stadium's there, maybe the new stadium will be right here.
If the Reds keep selling all their damn players, just tear that damn stadium down.
Yeah, I hear that. But that's just I think it's really cool that they're thinking about all this stuff now. And in my opinion, if they build this practice facility, that's in my eyes, that's them saying, hey, that whole, like we talked about the other day, I'm not fucking leaving. All that shit. I'm excited for it. What about you?
Oh, for sure. And Katie sounded like she had like several announcements that are in the works. Like she started talking about Ring of Honor, and she's like, well, I don't want to say too much more. Like she kept pulling back from saying things, which that just tells me, they're excited. They got a lot of announcements in the works and like things that they're excited about now. And that's why I just think the future is bright. Like I know not everybody loved Mike Brown as an owner over the years, some of his ways that, so he believes a certain way, and that's just how things are. But I feel like, Katie and her husband Troy and Elizabeth coming in, like Queen Elizabeth,
right?
But they're really turning things around, and they're bringing us more up to date, and it's great to see. So yeah, I mean, the future's exciting.
Yep.
But you got anything else you want to discuss before we get off here?
Not really. Just follow the Bengals Brews on Twitter, and
definitely
all I got.
Yeah, subscribe to the YouTube channel, man. That helps us out a lot. Retweet things on Twitter, anything. We're going to keep trying to have some good guests. I know next week we'll have Angelo Dawkins, fresh off WrestleMania, one half of the Street Profits. Angelo seems like a phenomenal guy. He's from went to high school at Fairfield, So multi-sport athlete, even in college. Just, I think he'll be great. He loves the Bengals. He loves Cincinnati. So should be a really fun guest. And we're going to go back to Saturday night. So it should be next Saturday at 7 p.m.
Yep. That'll be more of a Brews podcast than just Bengals like we had today. But and if you want to listen to it on Spotify, on Anchor, Apple, Google, all that good stuff too. So
and follow us on Twitter. We're on there. I try to interact with anybody.
At Dale Altman, or is it Altman Dale? I can't ever remember.
Yeah, it's Dale Altman. It's basic.
Okay. At Just Dale. That's what you need it to be. I keep telling you need to change it to Just Dale, but
yeah, I might have to, especially for Crap Caper.
Yeah, exactly. But that's really all I got for today.
All right, man. Shout out to everybody. Much love for sticking with us, joining the show.
Shout out to the Brews.